Hey there, sleepless one. You're here again, aren't you? In the dim of night, with your face soft lit by the hollow glow of your screen, eyes that forgot what REM feels like, and a mind that refuses to surrender to dreams, because reality, even in its most ancient form, is just too wild to ignore. So let me take your hand. Don't worry, I've washed mine. But she hadn't. She never did. The woman who came before us. The Cavewoman. You know, it's funny. We all think we've evolved, right? Showers with rainfall modes, lavender-infused shampoos, whitening toothpaste that costs more than a day's worth of calories in some parts of the world. But peel back the layers, and we are just hairless apes with schedules. We ache for primal things, shelter, warmth, touch. And yet, when we turn our gaze backward past the pyramids, past the plague, past Rome and Babylon, past even Mesopotamia's muddy cradle, we find her. Not Eve. No, Eve was too clean for this story. I'm talking about the unnamed, unremembered, unrecorded woman who squatted by the fire and scratched her lice-infested scalp with a chipped bone, unaware that one day, millions of years later, someone would be whispering about her into the void of insomnia. Tonight, we speak of her, not with mockery, not with disgust, but with the full awareness that she lived through more than most of us ever will. And yet, she stank. She reeked of survival. And so will this story. You think you know what bad hygiene is? You think forgetting to wear deodorant to work makes you a savage? Darling, the Cavewoman didn't even know what scented anything was. She didn't forget hygiene didn't exist. She wasn't rebelling against societal expectations. There were no expectations. There was only, do I die today or not? Do I freeze tonight? Or does this mammoth pelt still reek enough to keep the wolves confused? Picture it. The year is well. There is no year. There's no concept of a calendar. There's no ticking clock. Just the rhythm of hunger and the whisper of wind echoing through a damp cave. The air is thick with smoke from wet wood. There's a dead hare somewhere, rotting slowly, because meat is precious and waste is forbidden. There's urine in the corner, because going outside might get you killed. And there's her. She's crouched by the fire, picking something from her teeth with the sliver of a fishbone. Not because she cares about dental hygiene. Don't be ridiculous, but because it hurts. Her gums are inflamed. Infection is a kiss away from death. So she picks and she gnaws, and she waits for the ache to pass. It doesn't. Her name? You want a name? Names came later, with property and patriarchy. Back then, they had calls, sounds, maybe clicks, maybe guttural moans that meant, come, leave, or that thing bites. But names? Names are luxuries for the remembered. She is anonymous, eternal, and she smells like 1,000 deaths. And here you are, air-conditioned, moisturized, surrounded by soaps with words like coconut shimmer or ocean breeze, clutching your weighted blanket like it's armor. And yet you came here to listen to her story. Why? Because part of you remembers her. She lives in your blood, in the rhythm of your heartbeat when the lights flicker, in that irrational urge to run when you hear a rustle at night. She is the whisper in your genes that says, don't trust the silence. She is your grandmother's 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 ghost, and you owe her your existence, even if she never bathed once in her life. So let's peel it back. Let's walk barefoot into her cave. But I warn you, every step you take will stink more than the last, because this isn't a perfume ad. This is reality, raw and dripping. And I'll be your guide, your voice in the dark, your historian without sleep. Let's begin with the body. No, not a corpse though, that comes later. I mean the living, breathing, sweating vessel of survival that the Cavewoman carried through her brutal days. That body, hairier than ours, tougher in some ways, and infinitely more fragile in others. You see, hair was her only line of defense against cold, sun, and swarming parasites. She didn't shave. She didn't pluck. Every follicle was a flag of evolution flapping against extinction. And it itched. Oh gods, how it must have itched. Bugs nested in her hair, both above and below. Lice, that's child's play. Fleas, ticks, and things without names crawled across her scalp, burrowed into her crotch, made a kingdom out of her body. There were no combs, no oils, no mint-scented shampoos. Only fingers and rocks, and the occasional helper, usually another woman, who picked the vermin off with the care of a mother and the boredom of routine. You want to talk about bonding? Forget spa days. Nothing builds sisterhood like delousing each other while wolves howl in the distance and your fire starts to sputter. And oh, the stench. It wasn't bad in the way we think of bad. It was different. It was ancient, fermented. Her body odor wasn't a flaw. It was a map of her story. Every crevice reeked of her journey. The sweat under her arms told of the hours spent chasing something that could feed the clan. The tang between her thighs spoke of childbirth, sex, infection, and things left untreated. Her breath? Acidic, metallic, streaked with the rot of whatever animal sinew still clung to her molars. There was no brushing, no rinsing, only chewing on bark or bones or roots, and hoping that whatever spirit watched over molars would show mercy. Spoiler alert, it usually didn't. Teeth rotted. Gums bled. Smiles were more frightening than endearing. And still she survived. You're still here? Good, because it's about to get worse. Let's talk about menstruation. Oh yes, you thought this was going to be tame? We're going all the way. Because when the Cavewoman bled, she didn't hide it in pastel wrappers, in scent-blocking polymers. She bled into moss, into furs, into nothing at all. Sometimes she bled while walking, while hunting, while fighting. She bled in the open, and the world kept turning. Imagine that. No tampons, no pads. Just instinct, absorption, and maybe a strategically placed piece of rabbit fur, if she was lucky. Maybe not even that. And guess what? It stank. Blood does. Especially when mixed with sweat, dirt, and fear. But no one whispered, ooh. No one said unclean, because unclean was everything. Cleanliness was a fantasy, something the river promised, but never delivered. Are you squirming yet? Good. You should. Because comfort breeds forgetfulness. And you, dear sleepless one, are remembering now, aren't you? Some primal part of you is waking up, gagging slightly, but fascinated. Because deep inside, you know, she did what she had to. She adapted. She endured. She thrived in her own stinking way. And still, you wonder, how did she keep going? How did she not just collapse under the weight of filth and hardship? The truth is, she didn't have the luxury of collapse. There was always something hungrier than her, just beyond the firelight. So she rose, every day. She woke with bugs in her hair, sores on her feet, breath that could knock out a buffalo, and she rose. She hunted, she gathered, she birthed, she buried, she fought. Her hygiene was disgusting. Her soul was divine. You don't want to admit it, but part of you envies her. Because while you sit here, marinating in curated content and digital dopamine, she lived each second like it could be her last. And it often was. There was no future to worry about. No retirement plan. No 9 to 5, just now. Just fire. Just blood and bone and dirt and wind. Just life, in its rawest, most rancid form. So what if she never knew soap? She knew survival. She knew silence. She knew the weight of eyes watching from the tree line and the warmth of a child pressed against her under a shared hide. She knew that tomorrow was never promised, and that bodies, no matter how foul, were sacred. And you? You know that now too. We haven't even started yet. There are 10 long nights ahead, 10 fetid tailies to unwrap, each one more pungent than the last. You think you're ready, but you're not. Still, I'll be here. Voice in the dark, candle in the rot. Sleep is overrated anyway. You've stayed. Brave, foolish, or simply too tired to care. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful. It means we can go deeper now. Past the skin, past the smell. Into the marrow of a woman who never knew what it was to be clean, yet knew better than any of us what it meant to be alive. You came here expecting stories of filth, and you'll get them. But let me tell you something. In her world, filth was more than a byproduct. It was a protection, a ritual. Sometimes it was a disguise. And sometimes it was all she had left. You think she lived in squalor? No, she lived in truth. The kind of truth that sticks under your nails and leaves stains you can't scrub off. The kind that stings when you breathe too deeply. The kind that civilized people cover in lavender and light candles to forget. But she didn't forget. She didn't get to forget. Every breath, every scrape, every blister caked in ash was a line in the scripture of her survival. Let's talk about her skin. Not the glowing, airbrushed fantasy painted in documentaries or stone figurines smoothed by centuries of worship. No, her skin was a battlefield, calloused in strange places. Rougher on the right side if she threw rocks with her left. Burned raw along her forearms from leaning too close to the fire for too many nights. Cracked and bleeding in the creases of her feet because shoes were a future invention, and snow showed no mercy. Mud was medicine. Ash was armor. Dirt wasn't dirt. It was a second skin, baked in layers, a mosaic of ancient bacteria and desperate wisdom. She didn't exfoliate. She didn't hydrate. She didn't ask the mirror if she looked tired, because there were no mirrors, and everyone looked tired. No one was measuring cheekbones when the wind could peel your lips open in your sleep. Her skin bore the story of everything she had to crawl through blood. Birth, rot, winter, and somehow, despite the stink, it made her holy. Not pretty, never that, but real, solid, unforgiving, beautiful in the way a scar becomes a signature. And the oils. Oh, how the oils clung to her. Her scalp, thick with days' weeks of sweat and smoke and crushed insect parts. You want shine? She had shine. The kind that comes when your hair hasn't known water since the last storm. And even then, it was muddy. Grease wasn't a flaw. It was a glue that held her braids together, slicked strands down so they wouldn't catch on thorns. Her own body produced the only conditioner she'd ever need. And when the lice became too much, because they always became too much, she didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She pulled out a shard of flint and scraped. Slow, methodical, sometimes drawing blood. But better blood than madness. Better pain than the crawling that never stopped. She'd seen women go hollow from that itching. Seen them claw at their scalps until they bled, then sleep in their own weeping wounds, because there was no ointment, no doctor, no help, just her. And the scraping. You flinch at a paper cut. She flinched at nothing. She smelled of fire, but not the romantic kind. Not campfire stories and roasted marshmallows. I mean the acrid, choking stink of smoke that lingers in your hair for days, gets into your ears, your eyes, your soul. Fire was life and death, and every day she leaned too close just to feel her fingers again. She sat by it until the ends of her hair curled in protest, until her skin tightened with heat, until her breath tasted of ash. And even then, she stayed, because cold killed faster than smoke, and you could smell of anything as long as you didn't die. Her nails? Broken, blackened, jagged, sometimes bitten. Sometimes used to dig through frozen ground to bury a bone or scratch out a parasite. No manicures here. No soft cuticles or clear polish. Only remnants of meals and memories. Grease, blood, dirt, fur. Her hands were maps of violence and caretaking, holding both life and death with equal ease. She could cradle a newborn and gut a hair in the same hour. Hygiene wasn't a concern. Function was. And Cavewoman bled, not just once a moon. She bled from accidents, from childbirth, from fights, from rituals we'll never understand. Blood was not taboo. It was language. When the cut was shallow, she ignored it. When it ran down her leg, she might wrap it with moss or nothing. The sting reminded her she was still here, still not buried. Now imagine her mouth. You've brushed yours today, haven't you? Twice, maybe 3 times. Scraped your tongue. Swished synthetic mint to cover the sins of breakfast. Good for you. She had none of that. Her breath could melt bark. Her teeth were weapons turned ruins chipped, rotting, brown with old fat. If she was lucky, she still had most of them. If not, well, chewing was overrated. She'd seen old women gum their way through sinew, their mouths bleeding with every bite, refusing to die. She knew that once you lost your teeth, you started the slow descent into starvation. So she used them. All of them. For tearing, cracking, gnashing. Hygiene be damned. The rot was always coming anyway. May as well make it count. But the part that gets to people, the part that makes even the toughest city dweller wrinkle their nose, is this. She rarely, if ever, washed. And when she did, it was accidental. Rain was a blessing, sure, but also a threat. Wet meant cold. Cold meant death. So unless she had a reason, a birth, a death, a ritual, she didn't scrub. She didn't cleanse. She didn't stand naked under a waterfall while birds chirped. She sat in her filth and let it become her. Her smell wasn't a violation. It was a fingerprint. Her mate knew her by scent before he ever touched her. Her children nestled in her stink and called it home. Wolves could track her. So could kin. Scent was survival. Washing meant erasing that, and sometimes that meant disappearing entirely. So no, she didn't bathe. Not regularly, not willingly, and certainly not in anything resembling soap. The first soaps were centuries away, born of ashes and fat and fire. But she made do with leaves, bark, sand, the occasional abrasion. And always she rubbed not to get clean, but to remove, to slough off the memories that had already started to decay. And yes, she had sex. Often. Not because it was romantic, but because it was survival, a strange kind of communion. And there was no cleansing after. No discreet trip to the bathroom. No wet wipes, no morning after rituals. Fluids dried. Smells lingered. Bacteria bloomed. But that's what life did back then. It bloomed in the most grotesque, glorious ways. And don't get me started on waste. No plumbing, no privacy. If she had to relieve herself, she did. In the woods. In the corner. In the dark. With no leaves. Her hand. With no water. Her breath. She learned to crouch low. To wipe with snow. To bury what could be buried. And when she couldn't, she moved on. Sometimes, there was no time to hide. No time to clean. She birthed children with dirt on her palms. She touched wounds with the same fingers that had just dug out marrow. But here's the thing. She wasn't unaware. She knew. Not the science, not the names of germs, but the feeling, the rot, the way a wound smelled wrong, the way a baby's fever didn't break. She knew when filth crossed the line from survival to danger. She didn't always win, but she always noticed. And when death came, and it always did, she washed the dead. Not with soap, with tears, with spit, with smoke. She honored the body by touching it, by wrapping it, by making sure its last stink was familiar. Because in the end, what mattered wasn't whether you were clean. It was whether you were known. Still here? You're doing better than most. Most people turn away by now. Too much truth. Too much stench. But you've made it through the veil. You're beginning to see her. Not just smell her, And that's where it starts. Understanding, connection, memory. She was disgusting, yes, by our standards. But our standards are brittle. They snap at the first whiff of real life. Hers bent, adapted, held. Her hygiene was foul, but her strength unspeakable. And all of it, every inch, every sore, every unwashed inch of her was earned. And she lives in you, in your breath, in the bacteria that line your gut and whisper of ancient feasts, in your skin, which remembers how to tan, how to scar, how to heal, in your dreams, when the fire flickers and you hear the rustle of fur and the crunch of bone, and you think just for a second that she's standing behind you. And maybe she is. It's funny, isn't it, how you grow up being told that water is purity, that rivers cleanse and rain renews, and that somewhere in the wild past, people must have lived in perfect communion with nature, frolicking naked beneath waterfalls, rinsing their sins in mountain springs. The cave woman would have laughed in your face, or more likely stared blankly, blinked once, and gone back to digging mud from her ear with the blunt end of a stick, because to her, water wasn't clean. It was a trickster. It came at the wrong time, in the wrong way. It brought cold more than it brought clarity. It carried disease more often than it carried hope. It soaked into furs and never came out, rotting them from the inside. It drowned children. It made fires hiss and disappear when they were most needed. Water, in her world, was a suspicious guest. She approached it the way a soldier approaches an ambush, with her teeth clenched and a rock in her hand. The idea of bathing was laughable. No one bathed. No one dunked themselves into freezing streams for the pleasure of it. Not unless they wanted to die shivering and clean. Rain was endured, not embraced. And when it fell too long, caves flooded and mudslides came, and everyone learned again that being wet meant being vulnerable. Her skin didn't glisten with dew. It cracked under exposure. Her hair didn't drip seductively. It clung like a matted animal, smelling of old smoke and fermented oil. Sometimes she washed her hands. Not because of germs she didn't know germs, but because blood made her palms sticky and ash dried them out. And when she killed something and the viscera stuck between her fingers, she'd wipe it off on her thighs or the edge of a hide. That was her version of soap, friction, habit, instinct. The same way wolves lick their wounds, not to clean, but because pain demands motion. Stillness was rot. Stillness was death. And the irony, oh, the delicious irony, is that despite her filth, Cavewoman was watched. She was desired. She wasn't beautiful in the way you've been told to be, but in her stink, there was strength. In her grime, there was glory. Her body was evidence of existence. Her scars told stories more erotic than lipstick ever could. Her breath, foul as it was, meant she had eaten, that she had lived. And in those rare moments, when the sky broke open and the river ran full, maybe she waded in, just to feel the water press against her thighs, just to remember that the world still moved, that the cold hadn't won yet. She didn't rinse. She didn't lather. She simply stood, chest heaving, fur sticking to her back, eyes closed, not praying. She didn't know how. Just listening, letting the water run over the crust of yesterday's wounds. Not healing them, just softening them. Just enough to keep going. She never had a towel. She dried by fire or wind or not at all. Dampness clung to her like regret. And when her feet stayed wet too long, skin peeled. Fungus crept in. She didn't call it that, of course. She didn't call it anything. She winced. She limped. She urinated on it, maybe. Because urine was warm. Sometimes antiseptic. Sometimes just symbolic. A final offering to the body. If nothing else works, maybe this will. You laugh. You think it's absurd. But she didn't have your options. She didn't even have a word for option. Everything was necessity. Everything was urgent. Cleanliness wasn't a virtue. It was a privilege. A concept unborn. You grew up being taught that dirt was bad. She grew up knowing it was home. She slept in it. Not on it, in it. Curled in the dust, wrapped in furs that had seen more winters than names. Her bedding crawled. With lice, with mites, with memories. But she was used to it. Her skin no longer screamed in protest. It absorbed. It adapted. It became the filth. And here is the kicker, the thing that'll haunt you when you next press your palm against a hot shower wall and think you're alive. She wasn't miserable. She wasn't dreaming of bubble baths. She wasn't scratching tally marks into cave walls, counting down the days until Dove invented body wash. She didn't know another way. And because of that, she endured. With strength that would terrify you. With resilience that would shame your softest excuses. You sit in traffic and curse a delay. She sat in silence and heard her child wheeze through a fever she couldn't name. You flinch at a broken nail. She watched her toenail rot off, shrugged, and walked anyway. You get angry when your water runs cold. She considered it a miracle when it didn't defreeze solid in the bowl, made from a cracked skull. You ask me, how did she deal with infection? With wounds? With death under the fingernails? And I tell you, she didn't deal. She danced with it every day. It breathed beside her, cradled her children, kissed her lovers. Death didn't come in hospitals or white sheets. It came in puddles of blood that wouldn't clot, in scratches that puffed and festered, in eyes that stopped blinking. And still, she got up. She scavenged herbs. Not antiseptics. There was no anti. Just hope. Just try. Just rub this on that and pray the swelling goes down. It usually didn't. Sometimes, the smell of a wound told her more than its shape. A foul sweetness meant it was time to dig. A sulphurous tongue meant it was too late. She knew these things, not through science, but through agony. Trial and error, mostly error. And when the wound was too deep, when pus flowed, and the fever stole the mind, there was no mercy, no morphine, no sterile field, only ritual, only fire. She burned the rot. If she was brave, she cut it out. If she was lucky, the body forgave her. If not, well, the cave got quieter. But the most intimate stink, the one she never escaped, came from within. The body is a furnace, and when you trap it in layers of unwashed fur and fear, it smolders. Her genitals weren't unclean. They were just untouched by your inventions. There was no shaving, no perfumes, no fresh cotton. Just blood, sex, childbirth, sweat, and time, mixed and swirled and left to ferment. Bacteria danced, yeast colonized. She scratched, she swelled, she endured. There were days she couldn't sit without wincing. Days the itching was worse than the hunger. But she went on. She made poultices from roots. She squatted in steam from boiling leaves. Not because she understood chemistry, but because someone once told her it worked. And sometimes it did. Her scent became a language. To some, it was repellent. To others, irresistible. It wasn't about attraction. It was about recognition. She belonged to that cave, that clan, that moment, and her body screamed it from every pore. And what about childbirth, you ask? You want horror? Here it is. She gave birth without midwives, without clean sheets, sometimes without help at all, squatting in shadows, gripping stone, tearing from within, blood pooling beneath her, mixing with waste, mixing with soil, mixing with the breath of ancient ghosts. There were no epidurals, no incisions, just screaming in silence. And if the baby lived, she cut the cord with a tooth. If it didn't, she buried it with her bare hands. Her body tore. It always tore. She bled for days. Infections came like vultures. And still, she nursed. With cracked nipples, with fevers, with lice crawling in the cradle of her arm. She didn't sterilize. She didn't sanitize. She survived. Or didn't. But if she did, she didn't rest. She didn't recover. She wrapped the child in the same pelt that soaked her sweat and went back to the fire. Because there was no one else. Because that's what she was, a furnace, a fortress, a filth-covered god. And Cavewoman aged. Of course she did. You think old women didn't exist back then? They did. Not many. But the ones who did, oh, they carried every stink of every year like a badge. Their skin sagged not from indulgence, but from carrying too many winters in their spine. Their teeth gone, their joints swollen, their breath foul and wheezy. And yet they were revered, because they remembered, because they smelled of time itself. You think old people smell now? You then never smelled an elder whose bones were warmed by mammoth grease and whose fingers still bore the scent of 1,000 scraped hides. They didn't smell bad. They smelled eternal. So where does that leave you, dear listener? You with your soaps and your schedules, your loofahs, your mouthwash, your fear of sweat. You chase cleanliness like it's salvation, but she knew it was a myth, a passing dream. You will die, no matter how many times you rinse. But she lived, stinking, screaming, splitting herself open in a bed of lice and bones. And now she's whispering in your ear. Do you hear her? She's not asking you to return to the cave. She's not demanding you throw away your shampoo. She's just reminding you that filth isn't failure. That bodies are meant to be used, not worshipped. That you, too, are an animal. That beneath your fragrance and filters, there's something ancient. And it still remembers. It remembers the first time your kind touched fire. The first time a woman bled and didn't die. The first time a child suckled from a breast caked in ash and lived. That's what hygiene was, back then. Not cleanliness, but continuance. The ability to go on, stink and all. So next time you wrinkle your nose at someone's smell, remember, you come from her. You come from blood, shit, smoke, and rot. You are her. Washed, weakened, but hers. And maybe, just maybe, you should say thank you. She woke not to an alarm, but to ache. Ache in her joints, in her stomach, in her memory. A ache of hunger, yes, but also the ache of repetition. Of opening her eyes to another day of filth she never got to leave behind. The body forgets, you know. It learns to carry pain like a second skin, until the absence of it feels foreign. Her nostrils flared at the first inhale smoke. Fur, feces, breath, then closed again, accepting the bouquet of existence like it was perfume. Because it was. Because this was life, and it never came lightly. Hunger smelled different, depending on how long it had been since her last bite of something warm. 1 day old, and it made her sharp, alert. 2 days, and the stomach gurgled, and the head began to spin. By day 3, the smell of the cave turned metallic. Everything took on an edge, even her own body. The scent of her sweat changed, it thickened, grew sour, desperate, rank with the quiet scream of a starving animal. She would sniff her own armpit and know the body was starting to eat itself. But she never had time to sit and contemplate the poetry of decay. There were mouths to feed, bodies to clothe, furs to scrape and stretch and hang and stink into shape. And her own hands, so battered, they barely resembled flesh anymore, had to keep moving. Because when they stopped, she remembered. She remembered the child she lost to fever, the man who bled out after the hunt, the sister who didn't come back from the woods. So she moved. She crouched. She crawled. She squatted in ways your spine would weep over. She pulled the skin from bones with teeth clenched. She gathered roots that looked like tumors. She crushed insects and rubbed them on wounds. And always she stank of effort, Hunger changed her smell, but it also changed the way she was seen. In times of plenty, she was the one who sang softly over the fire. In famine, she was meat. They wouldn't say it, not with words. But in the eyes of the hungriest, she saw calculation. Wondered which part of her would cook fastest. Wondered how long she'd last if she were the last one standing. You think cannibalism is a horror story. For her, it was math. And not the abstract kind. No numbers, no equations. Just the sharp awareness that sometimes survival meant forgetting the name of the person whose leg you were chewing. But she didn't let herself get that far. She couldn't afford the luxury of being prey. So she worked harder. She sweat more. And that sweat mixed with the oils of unwashed scalp, with the sour cling of desperation, became her shield. She layered it on, day after day. Let it soak into the hides she wore. Let it coat her skin until even the wolves couldn't tell what she was anymore. There were days when she chewed on bone, not for meat. There was none but for memory, for the illusion of fullness. She scraped her teeth on old marrow and tricked her brain into thinking something had been received. And even that especially, that left a mark. The smell of old bone breath. The funk of starvation curling out between cracked lips. It could clear a cave. She knew what she had become. She wasn't ashamed. She didn't have time to be ashamed. Shame is a hobby for people with options. And when she did find something, some scrap of meat, some forgotten egg, some lucky rabbit too slow for her stone, it was never enough. But it was ritual. She would cook it, yes, if she had fire. But cooking was not cleansing. The smell of burnt fur, burnt feather, burnt fat stuck to her hands, her mouth, her hair. The grease dripped into her clothes, hardened in the folds of her arms, fed the lice in her collar. Yuveh never smelled victory until Yuveh smelled a woman who hasn't eaten in 3 days, tearing into raw sinew with fingers trembling and breath shaking, and moaning not from pleasure, but from relief. From the brief forgetting of the body's collapse, from the dizzying miracle of enough. And after, she didn't clean. There was nothing to clean with. She licked her fingers. She rubbed them on the inside of her thigh. She let the dogs gnaw what was left, if she had dogs. And she moved on. No sanitizer, no hand wipes. Just the hot, greasy memory of sustenance, clinging to every pore. And yes, she fed her children first, even when it meant she went without, even when her own milk dried up from lack. She fed them, and when they vomited from tainted meat, she held their fevered heads and prayed, not to gods, but to gut instinct that they'd see morning. She didn't bathe them. She rocked them. She sang in smells, in warmth, in a rhythm of musk and survival that no lullaby could match. And hunger made her body weep, not in tears, in fluids, in smells that shifted from one shade of foul to another. Her urine turned dark, acrid, her sweat thinned to ammonia. Her breath reeked of ketones, though she didn't know the word. She knew the taste, like metal, like the edge of a blade. And still she stood. Sometimes she fasted not from lack, but from mourning. When the dead were too many, when her belly refused, when the world tasted wrong, she would sit in the dark, wrapped in skins that stank of rot and fire, and breathe through her mouth, just to forget her own presence. The cave remembered. Every corner of it held her. The oils of her back rubbed into the stone where she sat each night. The blood of her menstruation dried into the dirt beneath her sleeping spot. The soot of her hands smeared like fingerprints in prehistoric paint. You want history? It was her. She was the archive. She was the document. She didn't write her story, she leaked it. She couldn't hide her scent. She didn't try. She carried it like a banner. And when rival clans came close, they didn't need to see her to know she was near. They smelled her. They knew the unique bouquet of ash, grease, blood, milk, bile, and fight. She wasn't a woman, She was a warning. You think identity lives in names, in birth certificates, in bios, and profile pictures. She knew it lived in stink, in the gut, in what your body said about you long before your mouth opened. And yes, they mocked her. Sometimes, even her own. The younger ones, not yet broken in by the years, would turn away when she passed, cover their noses, whisper, but not for long, because the day came always when they would sweat through their own grief, when they would piss themselves giving birth, when they would kill something with bare hands and have no river to rinse the sin away. Then they understood. No one stayed clean. Not for long. Cleanliness was a dream of the dying. The cave belonged to the filthy, and the filth belonged to her. So the next time your stomach turns at the smell of a stranger in the subway, remember this. You are soft. You are curated. You are one antiseptic wipe away from forgetting you were born from dirt. She wasn't. She never forgot. Because the stink never let her. And when she finally slept, when the hunger receded, if only for a night, she curled into her own stink like it was safety, like it was home. Because it was. You still here, my friend? Good, because we haven't yet reached the heat. Not the warmth of comfort, but the other kind. The heat that doesn't soothe. The heat that sears. That seeps into crevices, lifts old odors like ghosts from the folds of skin, and wraps itself around the cavewoman's flesh like a second atmosphere. She was never cool, never dry, never free from the damp kiss of her own body steam. She carried her own weather system, and it rained from within. In the day, when the sun reached across the mouth of the cave like a lazy predator, she felt the heat rise from her belly to her scalp. Her skin shimmered with sweat that never dried properly, trapped beneath layers of animal hide, trapped beneath expectation. That sweat wasn't refreshing. It wasn't a relief. It was punishment for survival. Salt poured from her with every movement, soaking into the pelts that clung to her back, soaking into her groin, where thighs met and rubbed raw from repetition. There was no cotton, no linen, no breathable fabric that whispered promises of wicking and coolness. There was only fur. Dead, cured if she had time, half-rotted if she didn't. It held every odor it met. It loved them. It trapped her breath, her spit, her blood, her partner's blood, the smoke from last winter, the scent of last week's kill. Her clothes were not clothes. They were carcasses. And they remembered. She stank in layers. There was no single scent, no single point of origin. It began in her scalp, oozing oils formed by fear and friction, and it spread down her back, where fleas laid eggs in the seams of her shoulder wrappings, across her chest, where sweat pooled beneath breasts that had long stopped being symbols and had become tools, down her stomach, where every fold carried the scent of effort, of crawling through moss, of lying belly down in dirt to stalk a boar, into her crotch, where the heat was relentless, where the furs rubbed and the labia swelled, where moisture never left, only thickened. There was no relief, no powder, no breeze that reached deep enough to lift the stench, just her hands, scraping, her nails, blunt from use, clawing through the thickness of itch and damp and fermented memory. Her body was alive, but so was everything on it. Microbes danced across her skin like fevered prayers. She didn't know them, but they knew her. And the fire. Always the fire. Not for romance, for survival. A constant burning at the center of her world, spewing smoke that clung to every inch of her existence. She slept beside it, ate over it, birthed in its shadow, and its residue claimed her. Her hair was always half singed. Her eyebrows curled at the ends. Her lungs wheezed with ash. But she needed it more than breath. Because without it, the night bit harder than the wolves. The fire was heat. It was life. It was death. And it was hers. Sometimes she fed it with bones. Not because she needed the heat, but because she needed the sound, the crackling, the reminder that something still broke, that something still surrendered. She watched marrow hiss from split femurs, watched fat curl into flames, and she inhaled it all. Her nostrils blackened, her eyes watered, but she didn't flinch, because fire didn't ask. Fire took, and the heat of her body responded in kind. Her pores wept endlessly. Not tears, not guilt, just the wet proof that the furnace was still running, that her blood hadn't frozen, that she was still here. It pooled in the valleys of her body, in the curve of her lower back, behind her knees, between her breasts, in the pocket where arm met torso. It turned sour within minutes, sweet within hours. It cooked, slowly, invisibly, until even the flies seemed intoxicated by her. She swatted them with dead hands. Not her own, thankfully, not yet, but the paws of animals she had worn down to husks. A badger's foot, a hare's leg, anything that once moved and now obeyed. She didn't flinch at maggots. She knew their names. Not in words, but in presence. She knew the ones that came too soon. That foretold infection. That burrowed when you slept too long. And she fought them off. Not with sprays or traps, but with fire and fists. And sometimes, even that failed. Boils formed. Not pretty, not poetic. Ugly, pulsing declarations of the body's revolt. Red and angry, they rose where sweat collected and never left. Behind the neck, beneath the breast. At the groin, she knew how to deal with them. Not gently. She pressed. She screamed if it was safe. She bit down on leather and forced it open with the edge of a stone. Pus sprayed. Relief followed. Until the next one. And the next. She didn't name the pain. She wore it. And still she kept moving. Because movement, even when drenched in stink and ache, was safer than rest. Rest invited rot. Stillness meant something inside might stop without warning. You think overheating is something you treat with ice packs and fans. She treated it by plunging her hands into cold mud, rubbing it across her chest like war paint, letting it dry and crack and fall in flakes, carrying some of the stench away, but never all of it. The rest clung, like punishment, like love. And her sex life? You dare ask? Yes, she had lovers. Not by candlelight, not on crisp sheets, but on the dirt and shadows, in silence so thick it pressed into their ribs. And yes, it was messy. Yes, it was smelly, but it was real, urgent. Heat met heat. Stink met stink. Desire was not doused, it was drenched. There was no modesty. There was no shame. There was only need. Her scent wasn't masked before coupling. It invited it. It declared her, told the others, I am ripe, I am ready. I am strong enough to survive what comes after. Cavewoman was not a fantasy. She was a furnace, and her lovers smelled too. They stank of musk and blood and dried semen. They kissed with mouths full of rot. They clawed at each other like beasts, not to conquer, but to remember what it meant to be alive. And afterward, they didn't bathe. They didn't cleanse. They slept in it. In the stew of their mingled excretions. In the aftermath of movement. Her thighs stuck together. Her armpits crusted. Her scalp itched harder. And she smiled. Not because she was satisfied, but because she was still in it. Still in the mess. Still not gone. And the seasons shifted. Heat became something else. The stench changed. From swampy to stale. From putrid to smoky. But it never left. It simply evolved, as she did. As she always would. And you? You chase clean like it's your god. You bleach your sheets and scrub your counters and buy things with names you can't pronounce just to erase the memory of being flesh. She didn't. She embraced it. She let the filth become her fingerprint. She let the heat burn her clean in its own savage way. So when next you sweat, don't wipe it away so fast. Let it remind you of her, of what came before, of what still lives inside. The fire beneath your skin never went out. You just forgot how to feel it. You've come this far, haven't you? Still tracing her footsteps through the soot and steam of forgotten centuries. Still breathing through your mouth when the scent of her reality gets too close. But maybe now, just maybe, you're beginning to realize this isn't about disgust. Not really. It never was. This is about intimacy. About proximity so raw it strips you of your modern skin and forces you to stand barefoot inside hers. And if you can stand it, if you can keep your gaze steady as we step further into her smoke-filled world, then I'll show you what filth looked like when it became sacred. Because there were moments. Oh yes, there were. Moments when dirt wasn't just survival, it was ritual. When stink wasn't shame, it was symbol. The Cavewoman may not have known words like God or grace, but she knew reverence. And it didn't wear white, it wore mud. She didn't pray in temples. She became one. Her own body the altar. Her own blood the offering. Her own breath raspy, sour, relentless rose like incense into the low ceiling of her world. When something mattered, really mattered, she didn't cleanse for it. She dirtied herself deeper. She painted her skin with ash, with ochre, with crushed insects, fermented roots, the blackened residue of too many winters. She marked herself not to beautify, but to belong, not to hide, but to declare, to say, I am here. I carry the memory of the fallen. I carry the promise of the unborn. I am stained because I must be. And when death came, and it always did, it did not arrive quietly. It screamed. It smelled. It oozed through the cracks in stone and spirit alike. The dead were not washed. Not the way you imagine it. There was no gentle sponge. No fragrant oils. No cotton sheets pulled tight. There was only spit, smoke, sometimes the hot blade of a knife dragged across the back of a dead man's neck, releasing steam from a soul not quite gone. She anointed the dead with her hands, the same hands she used to gut hairs, the same fingers that moments earlier had picked lice from her child's scalp. She didn't flinch. Death didn't make her cleaner. It made her slower, and slower was enough. She didn't fear the smell of a body going soft. She listened to it, knew how long she had before it changed from was to gone. She could smell the difference between silence and absence. She could taste the difference between sleep and stillness. She didn't need a clock. She had rot. And when they buried the body, if they buried it at all, it was never in a neat hole. It was under rocks, in crevices, wrapped in fur too stiff for use. And always, always, she carried a piece of it with her. Not jewelry, not relic, stench. It clung to her like legacy, because morning didn't smell like lily. It smelled like sweat, like matted hair, like days without food, like nights without fire, like her. Grief didn't clean her, it soaked her. And there were births, rituals of mess just as sacred. The placenta was not discarded. It was buried sometimes, eaten rarely, burned often. The ash from it mixed with blood to mark the child's forehead, or smeared between the thighs of the mother, sealing her back into the world with the smell of what she had survived. There were no midwives. There were watchers, listeners, women who had bled before, and women who had buried. They came with moss, with furs, with water if it was near. They came not to ease pain, but to witness it. To say, yes, you are broken, but you are here. And when the child came, it came screaming into a room that smelled of everything the world was sweat, shit, smoke, and a hope so fragile it stank of fear. And sometimes, when the child didn't cry, when the silence outlasted the mother's pulse, they didn't wipe away tears. They wiped away blood. They wiped it across their chests, their mouths, their faces. Not because they were monsters, but because grief had no language then, only gesture, and blood spoke louder than words. She marked herself with it, sometimes hers, sometimes another's. She smeared it into the lines of her knuckles, into the webs between her fingers, into the cracks of her feet, not to purify, but to remember. Every scar, every patch of dried fluid was a story, a bond, a warning. She didn't know how to forget, not because she lacked imagination, but because the stink never left. And when it did, then she worried, because scent was memory, and the clean were always the first to be forgotten. They had rituals for sickness too, not to heal, to acknowledge. A fevered body was not isolated. It was touched more, rubbed with heated stones, smoked over herbs, drenched in urine if the sweat smelled wrong. They would huddle close to the sick, even as the cough spread, because death alone was the only thing worse than death together. You fear contamination. She feared neglect. And when the sick one died, they didn't clean the cave. They burned parts of it. They moved. They let the stink become legend. Let the ghosts linger in corners too damp to use. She didn't believe in gods, not like you do, but she believed in smell. And a place that reeked of death could not be trusted to hold life. So they marked it, with charcoal, with blood, with streaks of menstrual fluid smeared by women who wanted to remind the shadows, we are still fertile. You will not take us all. That's how she prayed, not on her knees, but with her body. And when she danced, because yes, she didn't perfume herself. She perfumed the ground with the slap of her soles against dirt. She threw sweat like blessings. She twirled with a stink that made the children giggle and the old ones cry, because they remembered when they, too, had been fire and fury and fat and flesh. You think spirituality smells of incense. Hers smelled of unwashed armpits, and breath held too long, and farts ripped during chanting, and the smoke of burned hair. It was not elegant. It was real. The gods she never named never asked her to be clean. They only asked her to be present. And so she was. She never fasted to find purity. She starved because there was nothing. She never meditated. She crouched in silence because her child had died. She never wore white. She wore brown, black, the color of ash, the color of dry blood, the color of memory when it hardens. And still she was holy, in her filth, in her stink, in her ritual of rot. You scrub your sins with lavender. She covered hers with smoke. You light candles. She lit bone. You chant mantras. She bit her own tongue until it bled and spat the iron into the dirt, because that's how you told the earth you are still fighting. She had no books, no priests, no scripture. Her skin was her page. Her cave was her cathedral. Her breath rank, hot, unstoppable, was her hymn. And the most sacred act of all? Enduring, waking up again, in the same stench, with the same ache, with the same lice biting her scalp, and still going outside to fetch wood, to chase meat, to scold a child, to squat in her own filth and keep the fire alive. That was her worship, and now you smell it, don't you? Not just the rot, but the divinity inside it. You thought the rituals were the climax, didn't you? That surely the blood smear prayers and the fire-fed wound songs were the height of her filth. But no, that was just the sacred filth, the occasional filth, the kind of rot you lit fires for. Now let me show you the other kind, the everyday kind, the relentless, crawling, sighing sludge of existence that never left her side. That clung to her skin like grief. That gnawed at her soles like regret. That whispered from beneath her fingernails even as she slept. Let's talk about her feet. You like feet, don't you? You keep them pedicured, moisturized, locked in shoes with soles softer than any stone she ever knew. You tuck them in socks that wick away moisture and hide your shame. She didn't hide hers. She couldn't. Her feet were weapons and warnings, cracked, calloused, bleeding sometimes, fungal, more often than not. The nails thick as bone armor. Yellowed, curled, sharp enough to cut bark, soft enough to tear off in sleep. She walked on everything. Not roads, not sidewalks. Earth, the sharp, shifting kind. Rocks that bit back. Thorns that lodged deep. Snow that burned. Mud that sucked like a curse. And every step she took left a trace. Skin, pus, bits of her that she didn't miss because she had no time to grieve for the pieces that fell off. She never sat down to wash them. Never checked them unless they screamed. But even then, she only glanced, wiped the blood off on her calf, and limped forward. Because nothing chased death away like movement. She bled into the dirt. So many times the ground probably remembered her scent better than her voice. And the thighs. Oh, the thighs. She didn't walk gracefully. She stomped. She crouched. She ran when she had to. Her thighs rubbed constantly, raw and wet from sweat and friction, and the constant presence of too many layers and too little air. Chafing wasn't a problem. It was a state of being. And she didn't cure it. She adapted. She toughened. She rubbed moss between her legs sometimes, not for freshness, but to absorb what couldn't be held in anymore. Urine, menstrual blood, semen, pus from an abscess. She wasn't leaking. She was overflowing. And yet, no one handed her sympathy. No one patted her hand and said, "Self-care is important." Her self-care was staying alive. And that meant moving through the world while her own body protested with every rub and squelch. And her nose ran constantly. Not because she was sick, though sometimes she was, but because the cold bit deep and the fire always smoked. Her sinuses were battlefields, mucus thick as tar, crusted around her nostrils, wiped away with the back of her hand, smeared across her forearm, left to dry until it flaked off like old paint. She never once blew her nose into anything clean. There was nothing clean, just rags that already smelled of everything she'd already survived, and no one judged her, because everyone stank the same. And oh, the ears. You don't think of ears, do you? You think they're safe, but hers weren't. Her ears itched. Constantly. Filled with soot, bug eggs, wax hardened by cold, and softened by sweat. She scratched them with sticks, her own dirty fingers. Sometimes the tip of a bone. She bled sometimes. She didn't care. Better pain than silence. Better pain than the buzzing of something crawling inside that didn't belong. And let me not forget the eyes, the crust in the corners, the smoke-blurred vision, the lashes singed from leaning too close to flame. She didn't see clearly, not always. Her world was soft-edged. But she didn't need precision. She needed instinct. She needed the twitch of the bushes, the glint of teeth in the dark, the flicker of firelight on skin that wasn't hers. Her vision stung. Her lids stuck together some mornings. She rubbed them open with fists that carried the entire inventory of her body's filth. And still she looked forward. She always looked forward. Her back was a record, not a clean one. A living, oozing archive of her labor. Blisters from carrying wood. Burns from falling embers. Bites from insects that no longer feared her skin. She couldn't reach most of it. Couldn't see what festered. She scratched when she could. Against bark, against stone, against another's hand. She didn't ask for help. She endured or ignored. Or died. Those were the choices. And her mouth. The inside of it. We've spoken of her teeth, yes, but not the sores, the ulcers. The cuts that never closed because she chewed on bone and bark and roots that bit back. Her tongue was swollen some days, too dry or too cracked. She drank when she could, spit when she had to. But her saliva was never sweet. It stank, carried the rot from her gut back into the world. She kissed with it, nursed with it, blessed with it. And no one recoiled, because that was life. You talk about the taste of metal when you're nervous. She tasted iron every day, from her own gums, from the blood that never stopped flowing in some part of her mouth, from the meat she couldn't fully cook, from the knife she sometimes sucked clean in desperation, and her breath. If you stood too close, it didn't just offend, it invaded. It wrapped itself around you and made you remember, made you feel her. And maybe that's why they loved her. Not despite the stink, but because of it. Because it told them she was real, present, brutal, alive. She didn't perfume herself. She didn't scent her hair. Her scent was her name. The children knew it. The lovers knew it. The animals knew it. It was baked into her bones. And even now, across centuries, across evolution, across all your walls of soap and shame, part of you knows it too. You've smelled something once, somewhere, that made your stomach turn but your body lean closer. That was her. That was her memory breaking through. And yes, sometimes she did wash, if she had to. If the infection burned too hot, if the wound wouldn't close, if someone died and she needed to rinse their story from her hands. But it wasn't pleasant. It wasn't peaceful. It was shivering, frantic, desperate, cold water, muddy water, blood-tinged water. It made her cough. It made her teeth ache. But it worked sometimes. And when it didn't, she wrapped the filth tighter, as if hiding what couldn't be healed. And through all of it, she didn't stop touching others. She held children, hugged sisters, kissed lovers. She didn't believe the lie of contamination. She believed in closeness. She didn't recoil from a festering wound. She pressed her own festering body closer, because she knew pain shared was pain softened. Suffering witnessed was suffering made holy. And maybe that's what you fear most, not the stink, not the sores, but the intimacy of it, the closeness, the undeniable reminder that you too are just a body, a soft, leaking, breaking thing. And all the perfume in the world won't stop your skin from sagging, your teeth from loosening, your fluids from betraying you in the dark. But she never betrayed herself. She owned her stink, and in doing so, she made it a language, a warning, a memory, a truth. So go on, wash your hands, rinse your mouth, spray your scent, but don't forget her. Don't forget what it took to make you. And don't you dare pretend you're above the dirt she lived in, because one day you'll return to it, and she be waiting. At some point, even Cavewoman had to lie down. The body, no matter how stained with purpose, cannot outrun sleep forever. And sleep, in our world, was not rest. It was surrender. It was the long sigh into rot. It was the final stink of the day, finding its home between her thighs, under her breasts, behind her knees. It was the exhale of effort, cooling into fabric that hadn't seen water in seasons. It was knowing that everything she carried through the day, the piss, the smoke, the blood, the spit, would now steep into her bedding and not be removed. Her bed was not a bed. It was a suggestion. A pile of hides, most of them hardened by old fluids, most of them stolen from creatures that had died hard deaths and still lingered in scent. You've never slept on skin that once held a snarl. She had no mattress. She had no memory foam. Her memory was bone deep, and it told her every night, in every position, that nothing she lay upon was forgiving. The floor beneath her didn't give, it took. It took warmth. It took moisture. It took the last reserves of heat from her body and traded it for filth, mold, dust, mites she didn't name but knew by bite. When it rained, the water seeped up from the ground before it fell from the sky. She never woke dry. She never woke clean. She never woke without the imprint of where she had just tried to forget herself. And what did she wear to sleep? The same thing she wore during the day, or less, or nothing. depending on the season, depending on whether she had bled, depending on what part of her ached so badly she couldn't bear the scratch of wool against it. She slept in her own stink, in the stink of others, in the layers of dried effort smeared across her arms and legs, where fingernails had clawed because the itching would not stop, because the lice knew no bedtime. And no, she didn't change her clothes. Not before sleeping, not when she woke. She changed only when the fur rotted through, only when a hole let the cold in deeper than the warmth of the fire could follow. She wore her life, and her life weighed more at night. Sleep was not peaceful. It was panting. It was twitching. It was one ear open, one eye ready. The wolves did not respect bedtime, nor did the men, nor did the fever that crept in when you thought the cough had passed. And so she slept like an animal half-guarded, curled in the same stink she'd made all day, cradling it as if it would wake her before something else did. Sometimes she slept with others, children, sisters, a man. Bodies pressed so tight, the sweat of one became the balm of another. They didn't smell it. They inhaled it, accepted it, relied on it. To sleep next to someone was to accept their bacteria into your lungs, and no one declined, because warmth mattered more. The combined aroma of humanity was not repulsion, it was protection. And when she woke, if she woke, it was never with grace. She peeled herself from her bedding. Skin sometimes stuck to skin. Discharge dried to thigh. Her back popped. Her mouth opened and released a breath that could kill a mouse. But no one flinched. No one whispered, "Brush your teeth." There were no brushes. No paste. No running water to splash on a puffy face. Her mornings began with spit, thick, bitter, loosened only by the first chew of the day leather, root, sinew, if she was lucky. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes her own tongue, cracked and bloody, was all she had to swallow. And her hair? Matted, always, sometimes twined with bits of fur, sometimes twitched with lice, sometimes frozen into a crown of her own sweat from the night before. She didn't comb it. Cavewoman didn't even run her fingers through it, unless she was looking for something alive. Sometimes she cut it off in clumps. Sometimes she let it grow until the weight made her neck ache. But always, it told the story of her sleep. It told where her head had rested, what smoke she'd slept under, who she'd slept next to. There were no pillows, just fists, just arms folded beneath heads that ached, just the soft curve of another's hip, just dirt, dirt that clung to the side of her face, smeared across her cheekbones, worked its way into the corners of her mouth. She didn't wipe it off. What would be the point? She'd return to it by nightfall. Sometimes she urinated in her sleep. Not often. But when the fever was high, when the child inside her kicked too hard, when she hadn't eaten in days, she would wake damp, ashamed, not because someone told her to be, but because her body had broken its rhythm, because even her waist had betrayed her. She didn't cry. She wiped what she could with the edge of her own tunic and turned the hide over, let the piss dry where it couldn't reach her skin again. Sometimes she bled at night, from her womb, from a wound, from the place behind her knee where a thorn had settled too deep. She didn't check unless the pain throbbed. She didn't ask for help unless she couldn't walk. Her morning blood mixed with last night's sweat, with last week's dust, with the remnants of someone else's death. And she rose into it like a queen into smoke. You wrap yourself in weighted blankets. She wrapped herself in regret, in survival, in the skin of her mother's kill. She didn't toss and turn in search of dreams. She huddled against the cold and waited for nightmares to pass over her body like weather. She didn't have the luxury of nightmares that vanished with sunrise. Hers lingered, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for years, sometimes in the stench that wouldn't leave the bedding no matter how many fires she laid upon it. And don't ask about dreams. She didn't remember hers. Or if she did, she kept them quiet. Because the world had enough voices, enough howling, enough moaning from the corner where someone died last season, and their name had already slipped from the smoke. She didn't speak her dreams. She wore them, in her hunched shoulders, in the bruises that came from nothing, in the way she'd stare at a shadow too long and not explain why. And yet she slept. She slept because her body demanded it, because the days were long and the hunger louder, because even in filth, even in itch, even in damp, even in fear, something in her said, "Lie down, be still, let the dark take you, just for a while." And she listened. And in those hours, those bitter, rank hours, when the fire crackled low and breath steamed in the dark, she was as close to death as the living ever come, and she never feared it. Because to her, sleep and stink and stillness were not defeat. They were practice. She didn't become a mother with clean hands. She didn't hold her newborn in a hospital room, washed in antiseptic light, wearing a paper gown and blinking at monitors. She held them in the dark, with moss caked between her fingers, with blood dripping from between her legs, with the stink of labor climbing out of her pores like something alive. Her baby didn't cry in a sterile crib. It wailed into a world that smelled like fire and death and skin that hadn't known water in weeks. And she smiled, because if the child cried, it meant it had lungs. If it had lungs, it had a chance. And chances were rare currency in her world. She didn't wash the baby. Not right away. Sometimes not at all. She wiped off what she could with her own chest, her own arm, the inner lining of a deer pelt that already smelled like 4 seasons of struggle. The rest she left. The blood, the fluids, the breath of birth still steaming from the infant's nose. She believed in leaving things where they fell. She believed the world would claim what it wanted, and if the baby survived the first night, then maybe it was meant to. Cavewoman nursed. Of course she did. But not from breasts that were soft or perfumed or hidden beneath silk. Her nipples were cracked, crusted, chewed raw by cold air and mouths that didn't always latch right. She leaked milk while she squatted, while she walked, while she buried the afterbirth. It soaked through her furs, mixed with sweat, and turned sour by noon. But no one minded. That smell was proof of life, of continuity, of something that had grown inside her, passed through her, and refused to die. She bled too, longer than you'd expect, not just from birth, but from everything, from tearing, from scraping, from the inside out. Her thighs were streaked with dried rust more often than not. She didn't change anything. She just adjusted. She sat on moss, on bark, on her own heel. She didn't ask if it was normal. She didn't know what normal meant. She only knew that if it didn't kill her, it was just part of the deal. And the baby, oh, the baby, it soiled itself constantly. There were no diapers, just wraps, layers of fur or cloth that soaked up the excrement and kept it pressed against soft skin until she had time to swap it out. Or not. Rashes came. She rubbed ash on them. Sometimes her own spit, sometimes nothing. And still the child lived. Or didn't. And if it didn't, she didn't bathe in sorrow. She buried. She moved. She carried the stink of loss with her like a second womb. Always full. And the older children? They weren't cleaner. They were dirt-born, dirt-fed, dirt-tethered. They grew up gnawing on bones that had not been boiled. They scraped wax from their ears and flicked it into the fire. They had ringworm and lice and scars they didn't notice. They didn't know shame. They didn't ask, "Am I dirty?" They asked, "Am I alive?" And if the answer was yes, they kept running. She taught them what she knew, not with words, with gesture. She showed them how to scratch in the right place, how to rub sap into a wound and not cry, How to tell the difference between a good scab and a dangerous one. How to check their own feces for worms. How to smell sickness before it showed. She didn't educate them. She embedded herself into them, so that even when she died, her stink would guide them home. Because one day, she did begin to die. Not all at once, but slowly. Parts of her gave up before the rest. Her knees, her gums, her left eye weeping yellow for reasons no one knew. Her scalp growing patches where hair once thrived. She didn't fight it. She adjusted. She smelled the rot before anyone else did. And she lived with it. Not despite it. With it. Aging wasn't graceful. It was putrefaction in slow motion. Her teeth loosened. Her tongue thickened. Her urine changed color, then smell. Stronger. Like boiled bark in fear. And still, she squatted to piss. Still, she watched it steam against stone. Still, she sniffed the air afterward not with disgust, but calculation. She didn't isolate. She didn't go off into the woods to die like some quiet animal. She stayed. Among her people. Among the furs. Among the smoke. Among the very things she had birthed and buried. She carried her stink into every conversation. And no one flinched, because it was expected. It was earned. The children she raised now raised others. And when they bathed their own infants, they remembered her. In the crust under their nails. In the way they wiped a baby's anus with their thumb. In the way they spat into their palm to clean a face. That was love. That was hygiene. When she could no longer walk to the river on rare days, when the river wasn't frozen or fouled or cursed, others brought her moss soaked in water. She wiped her own thighs, her own feet, not to clean, but to comfort. She didn't want to smell new. She wanted to feel less thick with yesterday. And on the worst days, she urinated on her own hands. Because warmth was warmth. And sometimes the body needed to remember could still steam, that it could still radiate, that it still mattered. No one mocked her. No one said ew. There was no word for ooh. There was only silence. Respectful. Earthy. Heavy as smoke. And when death came, and it did, slowly, not as a scream, but as a sigh, she didn't beg for it to wait. She didn't ask to be bathed. She asked for fire, and furs, and silence. Not because she wanted dignity, but because she wanted her stink to settle before she stopped breathing. So the children would remember it. Not the fire, not the pain, but her. Her essence. That thick, sour, iron-rich perfume of perseverance. And they did, even now. You remember it, don't you? Something primal stirs when a woman sweats through her grief. When a mother wipes shit from a child's spine with her bare fingers and smiles. When a grandmother spits into a wound and makes it close. That's her. Still here. Still foul. Still holy. She did not die clean. She was never clean. That was never the point. She died the way she lived, layered in everything the body remembers when the mind forgets. Her skin, soft now in places that had once been calloused, began to loosen. Her joints stopped complaining and simply gave up. Her breath, ragged for weeks, had turned thick, heavy, sour like fermented meat wrapped in fur. There was no medicine. There was no cure. There was only her. And the rot that had waited patiently for decades, now rising through her like a tide she held back too long. They didn't hide her. They didn't separate her. The dying lived among the living. Her smells, sharper now, closer to something gone bad in the heat, were reminders of what everyone would become. The others tried to help sometimes, bringing water, moss, bone broth she couldn't swallow. Sometimes they just sat, inhaling her decay with quiet reverence. Because she had earned this. Because they knew they would stink the same one day. Her breath changed first. You could smell it before you saw her. Like copper and bile and sleep that had gone too long without waking. She no longer spoke, but her mouth opened, cracked lips, pus at the corner. Not kissed, not wiped, just observed, witnessed. She had wiped enough mouths in her life. Let this one speak for itself. The sweat came next, not from movement, from the body's unraveling, clammy, cold, constant. Her bedding, if you could call it that, was soaked, not in panic, in passage. Her thighs slick, her stomach damp. Her hair, still woven with dead grass and hardened oil, now reeked of something that wasn't quite human anymore. And then the urine. Not just leakage, surrender. The body stopped asking. It simply released, and she didn't flinch. She barely noticed. The warmth spread beneath her, soaked the hides. They didn't clean it. There was no reason to. There was no one else who would use that space. That corner belonged to her, and her piss, and her ending. Sometimes she defecated in her sleep, or while staring, unmoving, at a wall no one else could see. It wasn't frequent, but it came. And when it did, they didn't turn away. They covered it with ash, not to erase, but to honor. Fire's breath over the final insult. To shit yourself was not shameful. It was honest. It was the last purge of a life fully lived. What better proof of existence than what the body could no longer hold? And yet still she smelled familiar, because this was not new filth. This was hers. An intensification, yes, a ripening, but the same ingredients she had always worn. The same salt, the same blood, the same oils, the same excretions. Her body was not betraying her. It was singing her out. You think death smells foreign, but if you've lived close enough to your own body, really lived in it, you do know it's the most intimate smell there is. It's not floral, it's not chemical, it's not sanitized. It's wet leather, old wounds, forgotten armpits, pus-soaked rags. It's the breath between cries, the stink of a last memory trying to stay in the room a moment longer. Her children came close, even when they gagged, not because they wanted to, because they owed it. She had wiped their asses, had peeled maggots from their scalps, had licked dirt from their cuts when there was nothing else, had held their tiny, sweating bodies when they screamed through fevers. Now it was their turn to breathe her breath, to hold her wet hand, to stare into the blackened gum line and whisper nonsense, not comfort, just presence. There were no clean sheets. There were no final baths, no lavender water, no fresh clothes, just her, a woman in her final skin, one that clung sticky and hot to bones that had carried children, lovers, kills, firewood, winters, everything. Her last shiver wasn't from cold, it was from recognition, the body realizing it would never be lighter than this moment. That soon, the flies would arrive. And when they did, she welcomed them. She was not disgusted. She had seen them feed before, had watched their tiny feet shuffle over a festering wound, had felt their eggs hatch in the folds behind her knees after too many days of sweat and stillness. Now they returned, not as parasites, as participants. They licked her mouth, her eyes, the open wound on her ankle. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Her body had already signed the lease over to them, and it was fair. When she died, they didn't wash her. There was no point. They laid her out as she was, with her tangled, oil-slick hair, with the crusted blood between her legs, with her stomach bloated, not from food, but from time. They wrapped her in the same hides she'd soiled 1,000 nights. They didn't change her. They didn't pretend she had been anything else. They folded her into her filth, because that was the only honest thing to do. The place where she'd lain stank for weeks. They didn't clean it. They let it linger. A warning. A shrine. A whisper in scent. This is what we are. This is what we return to. This is what cannot be scrubbed away. And when the rains came, the cave let go of her smell, slowly, like grief drying from skin. But not completely. The rock still held her oils. The fire still remembered her smoke. And every now and then, when someone rolled onto that patch of fur, too close to where she had died, they woke choking, and smiled, because she was still here. Her filth didn't disappear. It became memory. It became inheritance. Cavewoman was gone, but not absent. Her stench didn't leave with her breath. It hung in the cave like smoke after a funeral pyre that no one could afford. And in that scent clinging to furs, to stone, to the inside of other people's lungs was her final truth. Not a word, not a myth, a presence. And it was stronger than memory, because the nose remembers what the tongue dares not say. You want to believe she was buried, that they gave her a place, a pit, a prayer. But you already know she wasn't. She was laid down, folded into her own warmth while it lasted, covered with skins that bore her piss. Ashes poured into her open mouth so the flies would go somewhere else. That was her casket, not carved wood, not polished stone, but everything she had touched and soiled and refused to abandon. She decomposed in the same way she had lived, slowly, thoroughly, with nothing left unstained. And in death, her body was not treated like waste, because she was the soil. She had fed enough mouths, scraped enough hides, nursed enough infants, squatted over enough fire pits, that to remove her from the land would have been sacrilege. They let her melt. They let her blur. They let her return. The cave didn't reject her. It absorbed her, welcomed her back like blood into sponge, like warmth into cold hands. And months later, when the last scraps of her body had been eaten by time and fungus and every beautiful, crawling thing that understood what death truly meant, they still talked about her. Not in words, in gestures, in smells. A certain type of moss was hers. A certain way of squatting, one leg slightly crooked, was how she used to do it. A certain corner of the cave where the fire smoked wrong, that was where her shoulder had always blocked the draft. She didn't leave stories. She left traces. In the way people wiped their noses. In the way they rubbed ash between their thighs when the itch got bad. In the way they leaned into their own stink instead of away from it. She taught them that life wasn't about purification. It was about persistence. That nothing holy was ever clean. You forget this with your clean clothes, your clean teeth, your clean language. You forget that the things that last do not sparkle. They fester, they ferment. They decay beautifully, slowly, with pride. You think she was the past, that her stink has no place in your world. But look closer. Look at your sheets after a nightmare. Look at the inside of your shoe after 10 hours. Look at the yellow crust in your eye, and the stain beneath your fingernails, and the way you sometimes smell someone you love and recoil, and still love them anyway. That's her. That's her truth sneaking back into your sanitized reality. She never asked to be remembered, but you did, with your obsession for origin, with your hunger for authenticity, with your documentaries and your theories and your curiosity. You dug her up with books, with questions, with videos like this one. You called her forth, but you weren't ready. You weren't ready to admit that everything you are came from everything you now avoid. That you, with your soap and shame, are born of her. That without her rot, there would be no you. And she knew it. She knew the body wasn't just a vehicle. It was a record, a message sent forward through centuries. Not in DNA alone, but in experience. The way her gut handled poison, so yours could digest anything. The way her wound bled through pain, so yours could swell with possibility. The way her skin blistered, so yours could soften. She was your trial run, and she didn't clean up before passing the torch. She handed it over sticky, wet, full of mold, full of life, And you, what have you done with it? Wrapped it in plastic, wiped it with sterile cloth, pretended it didn't stink. But it does. Oh, it still stinks. When you sit alone, shirt stuck to your back, breath sour from silence, thighs slick from existence itself. That's the truth of her inside you. When you bleed and don't tell anyone. When you itch in places no one mentions. When your socks crust from walking too far in the same thoughts. When your underwear reminds you that desire is a swamp, not a breeze. That's her. That's the ghost of the Cavewoman, reminding you that perfection is a lie you were sold by people afraid of mortality. She wasn't afraid. She was busy, scraping, feeding, breeding, bleeding, burning, stinking, living. She knew that the body would betray her, and she let it. She didn't waste time fearing what would leak. She let it leak. And she didn't apologize. She didn't whisper, "Excuse me," when her stomach growled or her foot bled or her breath turned raw. She owned it. And now it's your turn. You think you are here for education. But maybe, just maybe, you're here for permission. Permission to stop pretending that clean equals good. Permission to stink and survive. Permission to live like the woman you came from. She is not beneath you. She is before you. And her filth was not failure. It was foundation. And now here we are. You and I, her and you. All of us in this final stillness, where the cave has gone quiet, but not empty. Where her body is long gone, and yet somehow the smell still lingers in the air around your spine. You thought you were only visiting, that you could peek into her filth and step back out untouched. But you can't. You've breathed too deeply, and the stench has settled in. Because something shifted, didn't it? You didn't mean to admire her, but you did. You didn't mean to envy her. But somewhere between the lice and the blood, and the frostbitten thighs, and the piss-soaked furs, part of you saw a woman who never once asked for permission to exist. And you've been asking your whole life. You've scrubbed your skin until it broke. You've held your breath when your body made a sound. You've flushed and sprayed and whispered sorry into bathrooms and boardrooms and bedrooms. You've walked through the world believing that every odor from your body is a problem to solve, that your sweat is failure, that your discharge is shame, that your period must be hidden, that your armpits should smell like sugar, that your pubic hair is a mistake. She never believed any of that, because no one had lied to her yet. No one had sold her soap wrapped in insecurity. No one had painted her a picture of herself that made her feel like a stain to be removed. She never once stood naked in front of polished glass and asked, "Am I acceptable?" She stood in front of fire and asked, "Am I warm enough to live another night?" You want to pity her. You want to feel lucky that you're clean. But clean has cost you something, hasn't it? You've sterilized yourself into silence. You've wiped away not just the grime, but the grit. You've forgotten what your own body smells like when it's not performing. You've perfumed over your instincts. You've chlorinated your lineage, and you've done it in the name of civility. But she was civil, in the only way that mattered. She took care of her own. She wrapped children in skins that smelled like yesterday's kill and held them through sickness. She kissed with mouths full of rot and meant it. She shared her fire. She scraped someone else's back when the bugs burrowed too deep to ignore. That was hygiene, the kind that mattered. Not the kind that makes her hands pretty. The kind that keeps them warm enough to hold someone else's pain. And so here is the question you can no longer avoid. If she lived in you all along, why have you spent your whole life trying to scrub her away? Why do you recoil when your body reminds you it's still animal? Why do you turn on the fan when you make love, like your desire should be ventilated? Why do you panic when a child throws up on your lap instead of breathing through it and realizing this is the cost of being human? Why do you walk past someone on the street, wrinkle your nose, and forget that you too will smell like that someday? Why are you still afraid of the scent of effort? She was not. She stank of effort. Everywhere she went, people knew what she had survived by what her body told them. She didn't need a resume. Her knees spoke volumes. Her breath held stories. Her thighs carried the signature of decades of motion. And when someone pressed close to her, they inhaled her entire history. Can you say the same? You hide behind detergent. She wore her past on her skin. Not just scars, residue. The kind that doesn't come off. The kind you don't try to remove because it's part of what keeps you warm. And she was warm, even in winter. Because she accepted every inch of herself, even the ones that bled. Even the ones that never healed. Especially those. That's what you've lost. Not the connection to nature. That's just branding. What you've lost is the ability to sit in your own stink and not feel like you've done something wrong. You've forgotten that cleanliness is a costume, one you were handed, not born into. And that costume is expensive. It costs you time. It costs you shame. It costs you the ability to recognize when something real is happening. Real is not neat. Real doesn't come with a citrus scent. Real makes you wrinkle your nose and then lean closer. Real is the smell of a mother holding a fevered child. Real is the stink of sex that meant something. Real is the odor of fear as it leaves your pores in the middle of the night when the dreams come too hard. Real is the breath of a woman who didn't die politely. You think this was a history lesson, but it wasn't. This was a mirror. A fogged up, smeared, cracked mirror that smells like smoke and hair and hunger. And you're still standing in front of it, aren't you? Still trying to wipe the glass clean and seeing that it only smears. That no matter how hard you scrub, the reflection is still there. Still staring back at you with eyes that saw mammoths fall and children rise and bodies rot, and still she smiled. Because she wasn't waiting to be remembered. She wasn't begging to be forgiven. She didn't care what you thought of her hygiene. She only cared that her fire didn't go out. So what's yours? What fire are you keeping? Is it worth the scrubbing? Is it worth the perfume? Is it worth the lie? Because she didn't die for you to forget where you came from. She didn't survive lice and boils and childbirth without soap and periods without pads and teeth without dentists and sweat that could melt ice just so you could pretend you don't bleed. She didn't rot into the ground so that you could pretend the body I sent is sacred because it breaks. She didn't stink her way through life just so you could sell deodorant. She lived so hard, so loud, so foul, so full that centuries later, we still talk about her. Not because she was exceptional, but because she wasn't. Because she was you. Before you forgot. Before you decided that comfort mattered more than truth. Before you chose sterilization over surrender. Before you chose a clean death over a messy life. And still she waits. In your armpits. In your thighs. In the places you won't touch unless you're ashamed. She's there. Breathing. Smiling. Scraping something with a bone she sharpened on regret. And whispering into your sleep. You are mine. You are not clean. And that means you are not gone. So take this breath. This final one. Don't make it fresh. Make it honest. Let it carry everything you've been taught to hide. The heat. The hunger. The rot. The spit. The blood. The crust. The ache. Let it smell like a body that's still fighting. Let it stink. That's how she'll know you're still alive.